Author Mark Twain said, "Life would be a whole lot better if we could begin at age 80 and then gradually move to age 18. I mean, just think of the advantage, having all of the experience and wisdom of the years and then growing younger with the vigour of youth to apply it. But we know life isn't like that. We start out young and hopefully gaining wisdom by experience and asking questions. And one question people ask is, why am I here? What's the purpose of life? When it's all over, where will I be? And if that question isn't answered satisfactorily, it will always end in disillusionment. And we see that on a daily basis. And in the book, we're starting to explore Ecclesiastes. We have a man honest enough to ask that question and also write down what he saw as potential answers. And if we don't answer the question, what is the point of life correctly? Well, we are going to end up disillusioned. Here's part of a letter written by Elvis Presley during his last engagement ever in Las Vegas. "I feel so alone sometimes. The night is quiet for me. I'd love to be able to go to sleep. I'm glad that everyone is gone now. I'll probably not rest. I have no need for all of this. Help me, Lord." And how many people do we know that are genuinely happy with their lives? How many people do we know that are genuinely enjoying their life? They love their job. After years of marriage, they're still excited about their marriage. I venture to say very few and far between. It seems that we settle into the routine and we see things like Solomon does here. The daily grind, the empty routine. Not for nothing has he been called the Joker in the Old Testament pack. And this book is written by an old man who is pleading with the young. Please, please learn from me. I don't want you to look back on a wasted life. Please, please think about what I am saying from my experience of life. Verse 1 introduces us to the man who wrote this. I call him the teacher about life. Some Bible translations call him the preacher. But don't think of somebody standing in front of a pulpit proclaiming the truth. Yea, I say unto thee. The Hebrew word kohelet means a different kind of preacher. The Greek translation of the Old Testament takes the Hebrew word kohelet and translates it Ecclesiastes. It comes from the Greek word ecclesia, which is church or assembly in the New Testament. It literally means one who collects. That's why it's an apt title for Solomon. He is collecting and observing philosophies of life, the way people live under the sun, the way people live in life. And he puts them all together. This is Solomon, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem's take on the meaning of life. Solomon was the richest man on the face of the earth. He could buy his way in and out of anything, and he had spiritual assets asking God for wisdom and got it. Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, rebuilt the streets of the city, gave it public services and rearranged the whole town, and he was a man of prayer. Solomon's prayer of dedication after the temple was completed is one of the most beautiful prayers in Scripture. So just think of his advantages, his wealth, his spiritual wisdom, a relationship of some kind with God through a prayer life. However, he came to a time in his life where everything lost its shine, probably his midlife. And he begins to re-evaluate life, looking at life between birth and death. And he is puzzled. And rather than cling to the wisdom that God once gave him, he approaches life as a philosopher and searcher, using human wisdom apart from God's wisdom. It's not mentioned here, but we know it from other history books in the Bible. The man had 1,000 women, and his wives turned his heart away from God to serve false gods. Socrates said, by all means, get married. If you get a good wife, you'll become very happy. If you find a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. Solomon was quite a philosopher. Now, it's important to note that Solomon is only using observable data in the natural world. And apart from God's revelation, this is how mankind lives. That's why the book of Ecclesiastes probably is quoted more by agnostics and atheists than any other book in the Bible. That's why many conclusions in Ecclesiastes don't correspond with revealed truth. Not that the book isn't inspired, it is. But you see, inspiration in the scripture guarantees that this is accurate in what Solomon really thought and said. Doesn't mean that every verse in the Bible is to be taken as personal truth. Otherwise, you've got problems with all the statements of the devil or the statements of Pontius Pilate, etc. This is put here by God so that we can learn from it. And what a good read this book is. It will resensitize us. Sometimes we forget the ache of the unbeliever. We forget the questions and the issues that unbelievers deal with every day. It's easy to become cloistered in our Christian ghettos, filled with worship songs and Bible studies, and we forget to touch the nerve of the unbeliever that is around us daily. And this book will get us in touch once again with those questions we once asked. Also, the book will warn us. Here's a man with so much going for him, wealthy spiritual resources, God's wisdom, and yet he spirals downwards into a dark place. And we may know the Bible and have spiritual assets at our disposal, Christian websites, radio, television, books, yet end our journey badly. You see, it's not what we know, but what we know up here isn't right when it's just in our heads and that's it. It's what we live up to according to what we know. You could ask Luke Goodrich. He was burning stuff in his backyard. The fire got out of control, burning acres of land. Took scores of firefighters to put out the blaze he started. What's ironic is Luke Goodrich was in charge of the fire department. Well, Solomon is in charge of the wisdom department in Israel. Of all the people this should never happen to, a heart turning away from God. Well, it should be Solomon, but it did. So the book serves as a warning. That's the teacher about life. And from verse 2, there is the topic of life. Meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. That's his theme. In ancient Hebrew, when you want to emphasize a point, you repeat the word. So if something is really empty, it's empty, empty. Therefore, do you see this? He is saying meaningless to the max. Futility turned up to 100%. This is the view of a pessimist. Know any people like that? It will never work. It's all bad. That is how he's thinking in this period of life. Two pessimists met for coffee. Instead of shaking hands, they just shook heads. It'll never work. It's a bad deal. That's what Solomon is doing, the whole book, shaking his head. There were neighbours. One was a pessimist and the other an optimist. The optimist on a sunny day said, "What a beautiful day God has made." And the pessimist said, "That sun is going to scorch the crops." The next day it rained and the optimist said, "Beautiful, we need the rain." The pessimist said, "It's going to wash away all the seed." Well, this went on until one day the optimist invited the pessimist to a duck hunt. They were in a boat early in the morning and the gun went off and a bird fell to the ground. The optimist sent his dog to fetch the duck, and the dog ran on top of the water, grabbed the duck and ran back on top of the water to the boat. The optimist had a big smile and said to the pessimist, "What do you think of that?" And all the pessimist could say is, "Your dog can't swim, can he?" And that sums up Solomon's life. It's all empty. It's all meaningless. But taking it further, the pessimist strikes a chord of truth. He asks the question, what does man gain from all his labour at which he toils under the sun? Solomon is asking, after we've sucked dry all the pleasure we can, what is really left? What remains that will speak to my thirst for satisfaction? And his answer, zero. Absolutely nothing. And here's why. Notice another phrase. Under the sun? What gain or lasting satisfaction does a man have from all of his labour under the sun? Get used to that phrase because it's often repeated in Ecclesiastes. And do you know why? It's because his perspective is horizontal. He's looking around and seldom does he look up above the sun at the Creator. Now he will from time to time, but he's looking around at his world horizontally and has no vertical axis. And the reason nothing will satisfy him is because of this horizontal gaze. And we understand this, don't we? If in our marriage we're only looking at the temporal, the horizontal, there's a good chance that our marriage won't last over time because it's slippery ground. If you're in business and you're only looking at the horizontal, eventually you'll be frustrated. Life will lose its luster. It's the same if you're a college student getting a degree. It's only temporal and personal advancement for the here and now. You'll get burned out on life. At the end of life, when you turn out the lights on life and you wipe your hands from the grave of burying your loved ones, do you know what's left in terms of satisfaction? Nothing at all. If that is your gaze, the horizontal, this comes from a man who tries everything, as we'll get to see. By the way, that's why so many successful people and high achievers who reach their goals still end up asking the question, what's the point? How can I find meaning in life? They are a dropout from the school of happiness. Does that describe any of us? Frustrated, empty, bored with life, looking at life in the horizontal. How often do people say, I'm bored, there's nothing to do? And yet with all our boredom, we have more creature comforts and many more artificial amusements. But we sense that emptiness, especially those who are like Solomon, have the money to chase their wildest dreams. They seem to have it all because they're able to do things and buy things that other people can't. And they come to this conclusion, sometimes sooner than the rest. And boredom can descend on even the most exciting of advances. When Neil Armstrong walked on the moon in 1969, it was exciting. But by 1980, Dr. Lewis Thomas wrote what many people agreed with. You can walk on the moon if you like, but there's nothing to do there except look at the Earth. And when you've seen one Earth, you've seen them all. Even the most exciting novelties can become boring. Advertising is built on the assumption that we are never satisfied. Solomon is king. He is wise. People come to him. He's universally known. He's wealthy. And all he can say is, it is utterly meaningless. And he proves his point from verse 4. He describes the tediousness in life. Looking at different cycles of nature, you can hear cynicism and fatalism in his voice as he looks at the predictability of life. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. He's looking at the cycle of birth and death like Hindus. One comes and one goes. Today, thousands of babies will be born and thousands of people will die. In homes around the world, there's great joy, and in graveyards around the world, there's tears of sadness. And that happens day in and day out. And Solomon is probably thinking, now wait a minute, something is really strange. If we are God's crowning creation, we're so transient, and yet the earth just continues. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Why this constant death, birth, new generations asking the same questions? It almost seems unfair, doesn't it? Just when you get life wired, by the time you're older, it's time to die. And then a new generation comes and asks exactly the same questions on the same search. The French have a saying, the more things change, the more things remain the same. The people who argue with that are the young and ambitious. But they will learn. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, forever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. Solomon notices that the universe is a predictable place. He looks at the planets, the sun, sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, over and over again. He notices the hydrological cycle, how the sea water evaporates into the air, the breezes blow that air inland, the air cools, the vapour condenses, it forms clouds, the moisture hits the ground in the form of rain or snow, it collects on the earth through rivulets, streams and rivers, it dumps the same moisture back into the ocean, and it happens again and again. The ocean is a gigantic bath with the plug left out. Water evaporates, so it recycles. We are drinking the water drank a few times before by previous generations. And the sun, wind and water only mirror our own experience. We are moving at 19 miles a second, just spinning around but coming back to the same place. And because of the monotony, we look for ways of escape. And novelty seems to offer one escape route. So people change jobs, move house, buy gadgets or swap wives. Buying into the dream is what sells holiday brochures. A psychiatrist received a holiday postcard from a client. Having a lovely time. Wish you were here to explain why. And living with monotony and living with boredom, we turn to a hobby. Another strategy is the TV soap opera, losing ourselves in someone else's story. But in the end, it makes little difference. Solomon is saying what many people have concluded. Boring, predictable, monotonous. And why? Because people view things on the horizontal plane only, under the sun. And if we look at life as just under the sun, it's pretty routine, isn't it? We live by a lot of routines. Think of the routine of the housewife. Forget the hydrological cycle. Think of the laundry cycle. You wash clothes, fold them and put them away. We wear them, dirty them and put them in the laundry basket. You wash and fold and the cycle continues. The laundry basket is full and empty and then full. Think of the business person, up in the morning, off to work for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, come home, eat, get tired, go to bed, 6 o'clock in the morning, drag your carcass out of the bed, put clothes on it, put it in the car and send it off to work. Doing that for 50 weeks, then having 2 weeks off for a vacation and then starting the cycle all over again. Boring, predictable, monotonous. If you only view life as under the sun. And I can hear Solomon sighing now. All things are a wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. That's why televisions sell. We want our eyes and ears to be filled. And that's why we want the latest and the newest. We don't want just the TV. We want that digital high definition widescreen. And not just stereo anymore, surround sound. And in verse 11 he says, there is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. How many of you remember right now the leading politician from 50 years ago? Can you think of 6 actors or singers from 100 years ago? And when we are gone, we'll be forgotten. And Solomon, who had it all, saw his own mortality. And he said, oh, it's so pathetic. Now, I want to say this. His observations were astute and some very accurate, but his conclusions were wrong. You see, he is looking around and seeing the meaninglessness, and mostly he is absolutely correct. But he is missing a key point. And the point is supplied by Paul the Apostle. Listen to it. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it in hope. What is he saying? Yes, you have a hole in your life, and God put it there so that it would be filled with only eternal things. And the way to find meaning in life is not in time, but it's in eternity. God created and fashioned us for the eternal. And that's why all of the temporal stuff will still leave us crying, what's the point of it all? We need a vertical, not just a horizontal connection in our life. Perhaps God has been prodding some of you to reconsider the meaning of life. Why are you here? Where are you going? Those deep issues. If so, good. Follow this book, and you will find it one of the most relevant books ever. And my prayer is that you will come to the same conclusion that Solomon comes to at the end of this book. Wouldn't it be great to start life at age 80 and then move to age 18? But it's never going to happen. We start young and clueless, and then we learn things and we think we have a clue, and then we think we have more clues than everybody else and more clues than all of those people, including particularly our parents. And then as life goes on, we go, this is getting pretty empty and futile. And apart from God, it always will. You see, life on the horizontal can never satisfy. It just accentuates that big hole in our lives. There was a naval officer excited that he had just completed his first sea voyage. Now it was his chance to show his capability and take that ship home. He starts barking out orders. The deck is buzzing with men and women who are following them. He gets the destroyer out to the sea. He's proud. He's excited. Then a seaman walks up to him with a message from the captain. What's odd is it's a radio message from the captain. My personal congratulations. You have completed the exercise according to the book at amazing speed. In your haste, however, you overlooked one of the unwritten rules. Make sure the captain is aboard before getting underway. How many people live that way? A lot of people. Their ship is full speed ahead and God is not aboard. And they're out there to find the meaning of life, and they will always come up eventually with nothing much. Just give it time. Some are smarter and they'll arrive at this conclusion earlier, and they make a smart choice to make a connection with God. And by the way, that's the point of it all. Here's the answer to that question. What is the point of life? Life under the sun, merely S-U-N for sun. It's profitless. Life under the sun, S-O-N for sun, has meaning. It's when you find your life in relationship to Jesus Christ, who came from above the sun to earth to take us beyond time. That's the eternal peace that's missing in that hole. Put Jesus there. Anything else in that hole and you'll still be asking the question, what's the point? A Christ follower could not write as this teacher has. Asked to write about their experience of life, here are a couple of quotes. When I met Jesus, it was as if I had hiked to a cul-de-sac on a mountain trail and a helicopter came and took me further. And another, the master carpenter pointed out the cracks in my foundation and I gladly gave him the contract to rebuild my house from the ground up. Let's make that start, shall we?